They sent 4 soldiers to die quietly. The mountain had other plans. The order came down through channels that smelled like cowardice. Clean paper, dry ink, a signature from someone who would sleep warm that night. Corporal Cale Marin read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his breast pocket, against his ribs, where he kept things he wanted to remember, to hate. 4 soldiers, 1 alien guide of uncertain loyalty. Reconnaissance of a Veth artillery position embedded in the ridge system above Sector 9. Return with coordinates, or don't return at all. The subtext wasn't subtle. The sergeant who handed him the order, Reese, a man built like a shipping container and twice as empty, didn't meet his eyes when he said it. That was how you knew. When command stopped looking at you, you'd already been filed under acceptable losses. Marin stepped out of the mobile command tent into the gray Cassian morning. The sky here on the 3rd moon of Veth Prime's outer system was the color of old scar tissue, a permanent overcast that the colony briefings had called atmospherically stable, and that every soldier on the ground called the lid. Like something had put a lid on the world and forgotten to come back. The snow was deep. It had been snowing for 11 standard days and showed no interest in stopping. Private Ash was already waiting, standing with his arms wrapped around himself and talking to no one, which was his default state. Ash was from the Boston Arcology and had never been cold in his life before this moon, and he took it personally. He talked about it the way some men talked about ex-wives, obsessively circling back, unable to let it go. "Tell me again why the Veth picked the one moon in the system that gets weather," Ash said, without preamble, as Marin approached. "They didn't pick it. We did. Then why did we pick the one moon?" "Mineral rights." Marin pulled his collar up. "Walk!" Corporal Heisman was already moving toward the tree line, shoulders low, carbine slung across his chest. Heisman didn't talk much. He had the build of someone who'd been doing hard physical work since childhood, and the eyes of someone who'd been watching exits since around the same age. Marin trusted him the way you trust a heavy door, not because it was warm, but because it held. Specialist Joyner fell in beside Marin without being called. Joyner had been hit 3 months ago. A Veth pulse charge, left side, had scrambled the nerve clusters below his shoulder, in a way the field medics called stable, and Joyner called a persistent argument with gravity. His arm worked. He just had to refine it sometimes. 4 soldiers, 1 order, 1 mountain, and waiting at the tree line, leaning on a walking stick cut from gray-barked wood, was the alien. His name was Angelo, according to the colony settlement records. His species, the Cassi, the native inhabitants of this moon long before any human or Veth boot had touched its soil, didn't use the name the way humans used names. It was more like a sound his people made when they meant to signal presence to a nearby mind. But he'd learned to answer to it, and he answered to it now when Marin said it. "Corporal." His voice was low and multi-textured, like 2 instruments playing the same note. The Cassi had evolved for a denser atmosphere. Their vocal structures produced harmonics that humans heard as depth. In field translators, some of those harmonics got lost. Marin had stopped using the translator 3 weeks ago and had started just listening. He understood maybe 60%. It was enough. "You know where we're going?" Marin said. Angelo regarded him with the 4 amber-pale eyes that sat in a shallow arc across his brow, above the narrower sensory pits that served as a combined nose and ear. He was old, impossibly old, by Cassi standards, which meant something in the range of 200 standard years. And he moved like someone who had been injured many times and healed badly and kept moving anyway. "I know where the Veth are," Angelo said. "That is not quite the same thing." "Close enough." They moved into the trees. The forest was old growth, the kind of old that predated the colony charter by epochs. The trees were bone-white at the base and darkened to a deep arterial red higher up, where the canopy was so thick the snow didn't reach. The silence under those branches was not the absence of sound. It was its own presence, dense and patient, the way predators go quiet when they've already chosen. Ash was quiet for almost 4 minutes, which was a personal record. "You think Reese sent us because of what we saw," he said, low enough that it was technically just thinking out loud. No one answered. But no one told him to stop either. They had seen it 2 days ago, on the road coming out of the Valley settlement. A Veth civilian, collaborator or conscript or simply someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marin had never been sure, had stepped out from behind a hauler to plead for safe passage. Unarmed, hands visible. The Veth didn't have hands the way humans had hands, but the gesture was unmistakable. Sergeant Reese had shot her. The sound of it was still living somewhere behind Marin's sternum. The way it had been, not an ambush, not a hot decision in a firefight, Just a choice made the way you choose to close a door. The woman, the Veth, had crumpled in that specific way that meant the nervous system had stopped all at once, not gradually, and the only sound after was the snow and ash, making a small noise that wasn't quite a word. They hadn't filed a report, they hadn't done anything. They'd stood in the road, and then they'd walked back to camp, and Reese had looked at each of them in turn, not threatening, not boasting, just measuring, seeing what he had. Now they were here. He sent us because we're a liability, Heisman said. From behind a tree, he was checking angles around. Simple as that. That's what I said Ash. You said it like a question. I said it like a fact. Angelo had stopped ahead of them. He was standing with his weight distributed in a way the Cassie used for listening. 3-point stance, almost imperceptible sway, and his sensory pits were flared wide. He held up one hand, not the human way, just a slight extension of two fingers that on a Cassie meant pause everything. Marin held up a fist. Everyone stopped. The forest continued to be silent. And then something moved in it. High in the canopy, 40 meters ahead, something shifted. Not wind. There was no wind. Something with weight. Something that had been there for a while and had decided to stop pretending. Veth sniper. Marin's hand signals were short and fast. Joyner went left, Heisman right. Ash tucked low and didn't need to be told. Marin pulled Angelo by the arm. The alien allowed it. Fluid as water taking a new shape, and they were behind a deadfall in 2 seconds. The shot came from above and ahead. A tight beam pulse that cut a line through the bark of the tree where Heisman had been standing. No sound, just a change in the air's texture, and then the reek of ionized wood. One, Heisman said quietly. He was fine. 30 centimeters to the right, and he would not have been. They waited. The Veth used snipers differently than human forces. A human sniper's primary tool was patience. A Veth sniper's primary tool was geometry. They mapped kill corridors in their minds with a precision that came from optical biology, compound lens eyes that processed depth differently from human eyes. Once a Veth sniper had your geometry, it had you. The trick was to not be where it thought you were. Angelo, still beside Marin, said something so low the translator wouldn't have caught it. Marin listened past the harmonics and caught the shape of it. It has been here before, it knows this ground. How long before, Marin said, barely moving his lips. Days, maybe longer. It is patient the way stones are patient. Marin thought about that for a moment. A sniper that knew the ground, that had pre-mapped the angles, that had perhaps known they were coming. He pushed that thought down into the cold part of himself where he kept things he'd deal with later. Ash, he breathed. I need you to not be where you are in about 30 seconds. Delighted, Ash said. Be loud about it. A pause. Now that I can do. Ash moved, and Ash, when he chose to be, was remarkably efficiently loud. He scrambled left through the underbrush, snapped 2 dead branches, made the kind of noise that any listening intelligence would register as a panicked soldier changing position. The pulse came again, tracking left, cutting into the deadfall 10 meters from where Marin was crouching, which told him the angle. Marin came around the right side of the deadfall, low and fast, and had 3 seconds of the sniper's silhouette against the pale sky before the canopy closed it again. 3 seconds was enough. He didn't take the shot. He counted the heartbeats between positions, his own, the sniper's, and waited. The Veth sniper moved again, a small repositioning, and Marin heard Angelo make a sound that wasn't translatable but that his body understood as now. He fired once. The figure in the canopy shifted wrong, caught on a branch for a moment, and fell. Not all the way, caught again by the harness they used, hanging 30 meters up in the silence of the forest. Heisman was already scanning. Clear, near as I can tell. Marin stood up slowly. He looked at the hanging shape for a moment, the way it was still, the way it had been something and now wasn't. And then he looked away. They moved. The climb took 4 hours. The mountain had no respect for human endurance schedules. It went up and it kept going up, and the snow got deeper, and the trees got thinner, and the wind that had been absent at the base found them about 2/3 of the way up and made its position very clear. Ash stopped talking for almost 20 minutes, which worried Marin more than anything the Veth had done so far. At the halfway mark, there was a rope bridge across a crevasse that dropped 40 meters to black rock. The bridge was old Cassie construction, woven from the same red dark fiber as the upper canopy, tested by centuries of Angelo's people crossing, which meant it was, almost certainly, fine. Heisman tested it with one boot and looked at it with the expression of a man reviewing his life choices. It's fine, Marin said. It looks like yarn. It's fine. I'm not saying it isn't fine. I'm saying it looks like yarn. Angelo was already across. He had not paused or tested or looked at it twice. He'd just walked across, smooth and unhurried, and was now standing on the other side, looking back at them, with what Marin had learned to read as patience edging towards something that was not quite amusement. They went one by one. The bridge swayed. The wind expressed its opinions. The crevasse waited at the bottom with the blank patience of geological features. Each man went across, and each man made it. And by the end, all 4 soldiers were on the other side. And Ash was congratulating himself with the relief of someone who had narrowly avoided a disaster that had never actually threatened to happen. "Told you," Marin said. "You told me it was fine. You didn't tell me it was going to feel like that." "Would you have gone if I had?" Ash thought about it. "No, fine." Angelo said something then, addressed to Marin, low and direct while the others were still catching their breath. The harmonics were careful, almost formal. "I did not know if you would trust me enough to follow." Marin looked at him. The 4 amber eyes were steady, giving nothing away but not hiding anything either. Old eyes. Eyes that had watched things come and go across 2 centuries of a moon's slow turning. "I'm still deciding," Marin said. A pause. Then something that the translator would have called a smile. Except that Cassie didn't smile the way humans smiled. It was more like a settling, a reduction of bracing. As if something that had been held tense had been allowed to release, slightly. "Fair," Angelo said. The Veth position came into view just before the gray Cassian afternoon began its slow, undramatic darkening into gray Cassian night. It was dug into the ridge like a bad idea that had calcified. 3 artillery emplacements behind ceramic composite baffling. A central command module half buried in the snow, heat exchanger vents spiraling up from the rock face, and 2 patrol circuits running in overlapping ovals that managed to cover most of the approach angles, without quite covering all of them. Marin lay in the snow at the crest of a secondary ridge and looked at it for a long time. Heisman was beside him, doing the same. Joyner was watching their rear. Ash, for once in his life, was completely silent, processing what they were looking at with the focused attention of someone who understood that this particular moment was not the time. 6 gun crews, Heisman said. Estimate 8 to 12 per crew. At least 2 observers on the high platform. Command element, probably another 4 or 5. Add the patrols. Marin did the math. 70, maybe 90 Veth soldiers in and around a hardened position they'd had months to prepare. 4 human soldiers and 1 elderly alien in the snow. He started counting things that weren't soldiers. The heat exchangers ran on a cycle. He could see the vapor plumes pulsing. The patrol circuits were timed to the cycle, which meant they'd been set up by someone who was very organized, and was therefore assuming their enemies were also very organized. The baffling on the easternmost emplacement was oriented to deflect incoming fire from the valley approach, which meant it was exposed on the north face. The command module's heat signature, visible through the scope as a slight shimmer in the cold air, was right above the main power conduit. One well-placed charge on the conduit and the command module went dark. In the dark, the patrols lost their coordination signal. In the dark with no coordination, 70 organized soldiers became 70 confused individuals. "We're not here to destroy it," Joyner said quiet. "I know, just coordinates." "I know." Marin lowered the scope, "but knowing we could helps." He pulled out the mapping tablet and began entering the data. Emplacement positions, range estimation, patrol timing, command element location. The tablet's positioning system triangulated the ridge coordinates and locked them. 14 minutes of careful observation translated into a firing solution that would, when handed to the right people, reduce this entire position to a memory. He looked at it on the screen for a moment. 14 minutes. All those months of construction, all that preparation, all those soldiers, converted into a set of numbers that fit in a rectangle of glass. Angelo had been watching him work. He said something. "They built this to kill the people in the valley." "I know," Marin said. "The valley settlements, Cassie. Angelo's people." "We'll get the coordinates back," Marin said. "That's the mission." Angelo looked at the tablet, then at Marin. The 4 amber eyes didn't accuse, they just looked. Then he said, "There is a faster way down." The faster way down was a Cassie route. Centuries old, invisible to anyone who hadn't grown up knowing it. Carved into the rock face at angles that made geometric sense only if you understood how the Cassie moved and thought. Angelo led them through it in the fading light like a man walking through his own house in the dark, certain and unhurried, and the mountain allowed it. It was faster. It was also in the last quarter mile, closer to the Veth position than any of them had been on the way up. Close enough to hear. The Veth communicated in a register below standard human hearing, deep vibrational language that sat at the border of felt and heard. In the open, with enough distance, you didn't notice it. This close, in the cold, with the mountain pressing everything together, it was like standing next to a pipe organ playing notes you couldn't name. Marin felt Ash tense beside him. "They know something," Ash said, not a question. His voice was very low, stripped of all the usual performance. Marin listened. He couldn't understand Veth language, but he understood enough of armed humans and armed aliens to know what tension sounded like in any species. The vibrations coming from the position had that quality. Organized urgency, the specific pattern of a unit that has received information and is now acting on it. "Someone told them we were coming," Heisman said. Angelo stopped moving. Everyone looked at him. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He said something, and the translator caught enough of it, and what it caught was this: "Not me. But I know who." He turned and pointed back up the ridge, toward where they'd observed from. And then he said a name that none of them recognized except that it sounded like coordinates. Reese. The sergeant had known what they'd find, had perhaps arranged it, had certainly ensured that whatever information the patrol carried up the mountain would be anticipated. Whether it was cowardice, wanting plausible deniability about what happened to 4 soldiers who knew too much, or something darker, something transactional, Marin didn't spend time deciding. He looked at the tablet in his hand. The coordinates were locked. He looked at the Veth position, where the vibration language was deepening, where figures were moving along the patrol routes with new urgency. He looked at Angelo, who was watching him with the patient amber eyes of a man who had seen this particular shape of human crisis many times across 200 years, and who was, in this moment, simply present, witnessing. "How many exits does this route have?" Marin said. Angelo held up 3 fingers. "Which one runs east?" Angelo pointed. "Does it come out above or below the valley settlement?" "Above." Marin looked at Heisman. Heisman shrugged, which was as close to enthusiastic agreement as he ever got. "Ash," Marin said, listening, "I need you to run." "At last," said Ash. "Something I'm good at." They ran. The east exit from the Cassis route came out on a shelf of rock 40 meters above the tree line. Open sky overhead, the valley settlements visible as scattered warm lights below, and between them and those lights the snowfield. Half a kilometer of exposed ground, no cover, and somewhere behind them sounded the sounds of a Veth patrol that had found Utte's entry point, and was following with the methodical efficiency of soldiers who knew the terrain. Marin didn't look back. Looking back was for later when there was a later. He looked at the tablet. The coordinates were there, real, solid. The firing solution for 70-plus Veth soldiers, and 3 artillery emplacements. He looked at the distance to the colony perimeter, the relay towers that would carry the data, the way the light was fading and the snowfield going gray and borderless. Joyner was losing ground. The arm, not the arm, the nerve damage below it, was affecting his balance on the uneven snow, and he was compensating, and compensation costs time. He wasn't complaining. He was just slightly behind and getting slightly more behind. Marin dropped back. "I've got it," Joyner said. "I know you've got it. You don't have to. I know I don't have to." He fell into step beside Joyner and adjusted his pace to match, and that was the end of the discussion. Behind them, the patrol sounds were closer. The Veth moved well in cold terrain. Their circulatory biology adapted to temperature variation with an efficiency human bodies couldn't match. The only thing humans did better in cold was suffer through it and keep moving anyway. Which was not really a competitive advantage so much as a character flaw that occasionally saved your life. Heisman was running point, angling for the relay towers. Ash was somewhere just behind him, still running, not talking, which remained the most unnerving thing about the entire situation. The first shot came from above and behind. Not the methodical tight beam of a sniper, but the scattering suppressive fire of troops in pursuit. Less accurate. More concerning in the way it saturated the available space. The snow erupted in small explosions of white. Marin felt one pulse track past his face close enough to taste. He pulled Joyner down, fired back up the slope without stopping. 4 shots, suppressive. Don't try to aim, just occupy the geometry. And they were moving again before the echo resolved. "Heisman," he shouted. "On the tower," Heisman's voice, from ahead and left. 20 seconds. 20 seconds was forever. 20 seconds was also just 20 seconds, depending on what you did with it. Marin looked at the tablet. The relay tower was 70 meters ahead, and the relay tower had a standard military transmission package, and the transmission package needed a 3-second uplink. He looked at what was behind him. "Angelo," he said. The old Casii had kept pace with them across the snowfield, in a way that made no biomechanical sense, For something that was 200 years old and moved like a careful man with twice-healed joints. But he was there, at Marin's shoulder. "The patrol behind us," Marin said. "How many?" "6," Angelo said. "Maybe 8. Do they know this ground as well as you know it?" "No." "Is there anything between them and us that you know and they don't?" Angelo was quiet for one breath. Then, "Yes. Can you slow them down without dying?" A pause, a long one. Then, something that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite a sigh, and was perhaps just the sound of an old being, accepting that some days are simply like this. "I have been slowing things down on this mountain for 160 years, the translator said. "Or something close to that. I'll take that as a yes." Angelo peeled off left without ceremony and disappeared into a fold of the snowfield that Marin would not have been able to find even standing in it, and then the sounds behind them changed. Not the organized urgency of pursuit. Something else. Confusion. The particular quality of a unit that has encountered an obstacle it didn't expect in a place it didn't know an obstacle could exist. Marin didn't stop to watch. He ran. Heisman was at the relay tower with the access panel open and the uplink module exposed when Marin arrived. Ash was beside him, watching the approach with his weapon up and steady. And for one clear moment Marin saw him without the performance. Not the talkative kid from Boston who complained about the cold, but someone who'd been scared every day for 6 months and had kept showing up anyway. That was the thing no briefing ever covered. Bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was showing up scared, over and over until the mission was done. "Uplink ready," Heisman said. Marin pushed the tablet into the connection port. The screen changed. Transmission initializing, coordinates uploading, the 14 minutes of observation becoming a data package, becoming a transmission, becoming. Somewhere down in the warm valley, a decision. 3 seconds. The pursuit sounds were changing again behind them. Whatever Angelo had done, a hidden chassis construct, a collapsed snow shelf, a century-old trap set for exactly this kind of emergency. It hadn't stopped them, but it had spread them. They were no longer a unit. They were individuals scattered across a snowfield, reorganizing. Individuals were slower, uplink complete. The screen went green. Marin pulled the tablet free and stood up. Behind them the snowfield was dotted with distant shapes. 6, maybe 8, closing but not close. Ahead, the colony perimeter lights were visible and warm and specific in the gray. Joyner was leaning against the tower post, breathing hard, his left arm held deliberately at a certain angle that minimized the pull on the damaged nerves. He looked at Marin. "Done," he said. "Done. Good." A pause. "Can we walk for a bit?" "Yeah," Marin said. "We can walk." They walked. Ash broke his silence at the 300-meter mark, which in retrospect was impressive restraint. "So," he said, "when we get back, Reese." "Yeah. He tried to have us killed, more than once." "Yeah, we have proof of the coordinates he sold. Angelo can testify to the Veth communication pattern. And we've got 4 witnesses to the woman he shot on the road." "Yeah." A pause. "That's a lot of yeah," Ash said. "It is. Are you going to do something about it?" Marin walked for a while. The perimeter lights were closer now. The snow was still deep and the sky was still gray, and the mountain rose behind them, enormous and indifferent, as mountains always are. "I'm going to hand over the coordinates," he said. "And then I'm going to write a report." "Reports don't always." "I'm going to write a very specific report," Marin said, "with very specific details, and I'm going to sign it, and then I'm going to ask each of you to sign it. And then I'm going to walk it up the chain until I find someone who gives a damn." Ash thought about this. "What if no one does? Then I'll find a higher chain." Another pause. "And if that doesn't work?" "Then," Marin said, "we'll figure out what comes next." It wasn't a satisfying answer, he knew that. It wasn't the answer of a man who had a plan so much as the answer of a man who had decided not to stop, which was, when you got right down to it, a different thing, and sometimes the more important one. Angelo met them at the perimeter. He had come through a different route, his own route, probably some Cassie path that had no name in any human database, and that he had been walking since before anyone in the colony had been born. He was standing at the gate checkpoint with the walking stick across his back and the patient's expression of someone who had been waiting for about 3 minutes and considered that entirely reasonable. Marin stopped in front of him. "You came back," he said. "What would be the point of leaving now?" Angelo said. And there was something in the harmonics that the translator rendered as dry and that Marin understood as the oldest form of humor. The kind that only works if you've survived enough things to find the alternatives funny. "Thank you," Marin said. "For the mountain, for the route, for..." He stopped. He didn't have the right words for all of it. "For staying, for not being what we were afraid you'd be." Angelo made a small gesture. 2 fingers extended, which was the Cassie equivalent of it was nothing, and which both of them understood meant the opposite of that. They went inside. The report took 3 hours to write. Marin wrote it by hand first, the way he'd learned, not because it was faster, but because something about putting ink on paper made the words sit differently in his mind. More permanent, more accountable. He wrote about the road. He wrote about the woman. He wrote about the order and the mountain and the sniper and the coordinates Reese had somehow passed to the Veth position. He wrote it in the flat declarative language of military documentation and let the facts do what facts do when arranged honestly. Then he had Heisman sign it, then Joyner, then Ash, who read the whole thing twice without speaking, which was a kind of silence Marin had never heard from him before, and signed it with a hand that was steadier than Marin expected. He walked it up the chain at 0600. The officer who received it read it standing up, which meant he'd only planned to spend a moment on it. Halfway through, he sat down. That was when Marin knew it would go somewhere. Not immediately, not cleanly, not without cost, but somewhere. Outside, the Cassian sky was doing the thing it always did in the hours before dawn. Not lightening exactly, but becoming slightly less dark, the way recovery usually worked, gradual and without ceremony. Ash came out and stood beside him. "You think it'll matter," he said. "I think it already matters," Marin said, "whether or not anything gets done about it." Ash considered this with more seriousness than Marin expected. Then, "That's a very strange way to think about things." "It gets less strange," Marin said, "the longer you do it." From somewhere behind the perimeter wall, out in the direction of the mountain, there was the deep bass undertone that might have been the wind and might have been something else. Might have been the sound a very old Cassier makes when he's found somewhere warm enough to rest, briefly, before the next thing that needs doing. The coordinates had already been transmitted to fire control. The guns were being positioned. The calculations were being run by people in warm rooms with access to data and resources that 4 soldiers in the snow could not have carried. 14 minutes of watching. 3 seconds of transmission. The rest was other people's work now. The soldiers had done what soldiers do in the rare moments when they do their jobs correctly. They had gone into a dangerous place, gathered what was needed, and come back with it intact. What came next would be decided by forces larger than any of them. It almost always was, but the coordinates were real. The report was filed. The woman on the road had 4 people who remembered her name, even though none of them had known it. 4 people who would say, when asked, that they had been there, that they had seen, that they had not pretended otherwise. That was what you did. Not because it was guaranteed to work, not because the systems were built to listen, or the chains of command were reliably just, or the universe owed anyone a clean resolution. You did it because the alternative was to become the thing you were fighting. Marin went inside and got something warm to drink, and thought about the rope bridge, and the way each of them had crossed it, one by one, into the uncertainty on the other side. The bridge had held. The mountain had not taken them. The mission was done. Tomorrow there would be another mountain. Tonight, it was enough to be standing on this side of it.